It is now my pleasure to introduce our first panel and bring up the panel moderator, Tony Pippa. Tony is a senior fellow in the Center for Sustainable Development at the Brookings Institution. He leads the Reimagining Rural Policy Initiative, which seeks to modernize and transform U.S. policy to better enable equitable and sustainable development across rural America. That's the formal thing. The informal thing is he's an expert on all things rural. He's got a great podcast. He's got great writings at Brookings. You might know this about me. I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to ec dev. Like for me, reading white papers is cool and fun. I like to do that as a hobby. And he's going to be joined by two good friends of mine. One that I just got to see for the first time. We've been seeing each other over Zoom for quite some time. But Molly Hemstreet of the Industrial Commons. And Molly, I'm not sure if you're rocking with that title now or the Tice title, but I know you from the Industrial Commons. And then Ann Wiper, who is the first serving president for the North Carolina Textile Innovation and Sustainability Engine. Would you all please come up to the stage? And while you're coming up, I'm just going to say, I've had the good fortune to get roped into this work. I don't know, maybe it's penance from a past life, but I've been thrilled to be involved in helping on this work. So thank you very much, Tony.
Thank you.
Very nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Oh, it is on. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be back in North Carolina. I spent 10 years of my life in philanthropy here in North Carolina, both at a community foundation and a private foundation, and this place has a special place in my heart. Really excited, and thanks to Tom and NCIDEA for the invitation to be here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. As Tom said, I'm at the Brookings Institution now in Washington, D.C., where I work on federal policy as it relates to rural places. And I really agree with what he was saying about innovation and entrepreneurship as being really at the heartbeat of where we are as a country in driving in what has made, the American economy great. But I have to say, people don't generally think of rural places when they think of innovation and entrepreneurship. And he mentioned that I have a podcast, and that podcast is called Reimagine Rural, shameless promotion. Find it anywhere you listen to your podcasts. And for the podcast, I visit places across the country, rural places, that are thriving, that are seeing some progress on their social and economic aspirations. And so I see a lot of entrepreneurial activity up close. Traditionally or historically, we might have thought of rural economies as sometimes extractive, where we would take the natural resources and the value might leave, or kind of a trade-off between large companies coming in and trading off for the labor that they have. But the places that I'm visiting that are doing well are really building upon their entrepreneurial base and on their local assets. Those assets are human, those assets are sometimes natural. Heritage is actually an asset as well. And I hope that that's the conversation that we'll get in here to today. And it has been interesting to watch our federal government's policy evolve to understand that investing in local people and those local assets is actually really important for helping those places be prosperous. And so we've seen a spate of what I would call place-based policy. It's not policy it's not resources just going to people or individuals or households, but it's going to communities and to places. So today we're going to explore an example of this happening right here in Western North Carolina, and how Molly and Ann and others are together kind of building a rural regional economic cluster that's also being helped by federal policy, and we'll maybe get into how well that's working or not. But Molly, I want to start this conversation with you. As Tom said, you're the founder and co-executive director of an organization called the Industrial Commons, Morganton, North Carolina. And let's begin at the very beginning. Why Morganton, North Carolina? What were the origins of the Industrial Commons? And what's your relationship? What's it and your relationship to that place in Western North Carolina?
Great, thank you. And thank you, Tom, for the invitation and for being on our board as a great board member. And just for all the team that puts on these wonderful conversations, it's an honor to be invited and share our story. So some of you come from far, some of you come from close by, 7 minutes away. I've lived my entire life in the same square mile. With the exception of the opportunity to go to Duke University, I've always lived in Morganton. I was born there. I went away to school, but I really wanted to come back, partly because of the beauty, partly because my family was there. And so I really wanted to find a way to be able to stay. So when I was growing up, textiles, furniture, that's really kind of the industry that has built our communities. In fact, it's still the largest concentration of textile and furniture workers across the United States is in the Carolinas. And so, but during that time, there was just a massive amount of disinvestment. Our communities lost 40,000 jobs. Kind of our 4-county metropolitan statistical area lost 40,000 jobs. So that was where I found myself when I came back from Duke University to be a public school teacher. But I had the good fortune to be part of a lot of organizing that was going on in my community, and particularly my husband is from the Latino community. We were starting to see organizing happening, particularly in a chicken processing plant, which was an interesting part of this story. So I started to see workers that were organizing and this kind of vast breakdown of the economics of my community. And so I asked this question, like, what is my role? It goes back to this question of like, how do we invest in ourselves? How do we and how would I invest in my community? So I decided that I wanted to start a textile plant. That might have not been now looking in retrospect, I think it was a good idea, but I didn't necessarily have all the tools to do it. But I did, and I started a company called Opportunity Threads based on the principles of people, planet, and profit. And that company has gone on to do well. And I actually started it as an employee-owned company because I was a mom. I had a new baby. I had a husband that was in graduate school. I had elderly, parents that I was taking care of. So I did use this model of employee ownership. I know we have allies from the North Carolina Employee Ownership Center here. And so what was really wonderful was to see this company thrive in an industry that was had an opportunity to remake itself, to be very profitable, and then also to be deeply community rooted. And from there, we really worked with other of our allies to start to build a network, particularly the folks from the Manufacturing Solutions Center. I know that they're here as well. They saw that we had something in our community. They supported me in starting to build networks because we didn't want to just be out there on our own, building sustainable businesses around the sustainable textile industry. So it's from there that we built a really neat small organization called the Carolina Textile District. And then we had allies that wanted to give us money. We didn't start with grants. Grants came later. And so it was there that I wanted to build the organization that I never had when I had to put my house up and work at a very low wage to get my business started. And so it was there that we started the Industrial Commons, which is a 501c3 and also is has a public benefits corporation as it as well. So it was really that organization of now what I know I'm doing is ecosysteming that could build an ecosystem in a region that would drive economic innovation, support for workers, and really start to usher in a renaissance of the textile industry around the green economy. And that's how we got started.
So that's wonderful, and it's wonderful to trace that trajectory from your own business then to the district and then to Industrial Commons. So just give us a little more detail. What are some of the core principles of Industrial Commons, and what are some of the practical things that you're doing, like that Industrial Commons does?
Sure. So our mission is really about rebuilding a diverse working class based on locally rooted wealth. So and just, so much of this, as I know from entrepreneurs, it comes from your own experience, whether that was your father who was a farmer and you saw him, working, or a mechanic. So much of my experience was involved with the mass exodus of work and leaving our community with 17% unemployment. So in thinking about that, so much of our work has been about models that can root wealth locally. What does that mean to get communities like mine out of these cycles of generational poverty? How do you pull rural communities forward? So in that's really always has been at our heart, and I'm proud that our mission has, even though it's grown, it has always stayed true to rebuilding a diverse working class based on locally rooted wealth. So we really have 4 fields of work where we look at business development, and I'll go into that a little bit more, support for businesses, support for workers, support for our community, and then support for industrial networks or industry clusters. We have a 5th piece around infrastructure. So there's this kind of myth that there's all these buildings out there in rural communities that are just waiting for everyone to come and, find ways to start their businesses up. A lot of that infrastructure has aged. A lot of that infrastructure is no longer in a place where it can support a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem. So we also are really buying up those resources so that they're in the hands of our community, because most of our community is owned by about 6 different people. So we're trying to change that and building up more infrastructure. So a couple neat projects that I'm really proud of. One of them is the reconstruction of a brownfield. There's a 30-acre brownfield that's like in the heart of our downtown. When I was growing up, it was a thriving Drexel Heritage company where 2,400 people worked. It was actually 1 in 6 people had someone that was working at this furniture company. That work left, the furniture company burned down, and it sat in the middle of our community since I can remember. So we are working on revitalizing that through a really phenomenal grant through the Appalachian Regional Commission, which we're very thankful of. The other really neat company, we incubate and we start companies, particularly those that are driving the green, what we will call the circular economy, which Anne will get to us in a little bit, is material return. So we realized, as as entrepreneurs, there's a problem, and you can convert that problem into a business. And so there's a huge problem with just textile waste in our communities, and most of that actually ends up in the landfill. So this really unique company, what it does is it takes our textile waste, and it takes that waste and at equal performance and equal value gets it back into the supply chain. And this is where we actually started to partner with Smart Wool and really created the first scaled circular project in the US that has been able to scale and really drive our region as pulling in these resources and to really brand it as this circular regional model for textile sustainability for the country.
Wow, a lot there. And a lot of innovation, right? Just in rural Western North Carolina. And I think it's so important to hear you say, like, how you took the site where Drexel Heritage was, the large employer that, we're sometimes used to seeing in rural communities. And it's being adapted and reused in a totally different way, but in a way that seeks to also sort of share the benefits more widely. When you were talking about the story, you talked about a network, and that it's not just about being alone, but it's also about being networked. So give us a little bit of a bridge to what is now a cluster that's going even regionally, and leading to the North Carolina Textile Innovation and Sustainability Engine. What was the jump there? And then, Anne, I want to bring you into that conversation, and so you can talk about what the mission and the objectives are for that engine.
Sure. So you're right. Like often those the people that go to the conferences and are the face of things. And I realize, like, for now, that's me. There are phenomenal people that have walked alongside me in this journey. One of them is Sarah Chester, who we have been co-directors since the very beginning. And then there are also just these phenomenal allies that recognize the entrepreneurial seed and what we were doing. And I think what rural people often have, which is a long-term view. We take a long time. This isn't just the work of a grant cycle. This is the work of a lifetime and the vocation of a lifetime. And I think that's unique often to rural communities. And so there were partners that came along that had been really allies of building up the textile industry. And I just want to name a few of those. I mean, I've already named the Manufacturing Solutions Center, but we have our community colleges, particularly Gaston Textile Technology Center at Gaston Community College. And then also, I can't say enough about the Wilson College of Textiles at NC State, who even before the engine had come along and supported us. So there was just this great network, because I think there's this like deep sense of pride around revitalization and building on the skills and the assets that we just needed a new vision of what those could be. So it was really this coming together of assets and a vision for wanting to get young people and new people involved, and then just this need in our world to have practical solutions to greening an economy. And the textile industry is right there where we can provide very practical and economically viable solutions to green an economy. So we saw a lot of win-win-wins, and I think there were just people that really wanted to band together to author a future that was different. And that's where we pulled together this Hail Mary of a National Science Foundation grant, but here we are.
So, Ann, let me ask you, this National Science Foundation grant is funding the North Carolina Textile Innovation and Sustainability Engine. What does that mean? Like, what are the regional innovation engines to begin with? And then how is that support, and what is the innovation engine itself? Like, what's the mission and objectives there?
Okay, I'll start with that. I think more than anything, the work that Molly and Sarah have done is so inspirational. To take what they've done in Morganton and Burke County and realize there was the opportunity to have an even bigger ripple effect, and then go for an NSF engine. I mean, the chances of it happening seem so slim, and to pull that off is unbelievable. So I am grateful to be able to go to work every day with Molly. But I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Engines program. It was part of the Inflation Reduction Act, and specifically the CHIPS and Science Act, which was, I think, approved in 2022, somewhere in there. And so there are 10 engines. They are place-based investments that the NSF is managing. And there is the opportunity to get up to $160 million over 10 years. We have 2 years right now, and we have to kind of get all of this built out to support a $160 million entity. But it's really quite remarkable how diverse they are. They're centered in innovation, obviously. They're centered in technologies that will take longer than a short period of time to be able to get to scale and being commercial. They are grounded in sustainability, and they are all over the country, and surprisingly, they're in an awful lot of red states. So this was a bipartisan approved program, which super grateful for that, because what we're doing benefits everybody. So to our specific engine, and you can call it the textile engine, okay, because the North Carolina,
there we go.
The North Carolina Textile Innovation and Sustainability Engine is a mouthful. But the whole mission is to advance our nation's capacity in textiles through innovation, sustainability, and really to get to national security. I think when you think about how much this industry has contracted over the last 20 years with so many things that have been offshored, but we still have the infrastructure here. We still have the expertise, although it is definitely part of the silver tsunami. We have a limited period of time to be able to transfer knowledge. We also have a globally recognized textile science university in NC State and Wilson College, and we have this community college network that's incredible. So I'll talk a little bit longer. There's really 4 things we're trying to get after with the engine. There's 4 pillars of work. So there's use-inspired R&D, which this room should stay very interested in that. We also have a translation mission. So how do we take that innovation and technology and translate that to commercialized and scaled projects that really lead to the economic development and job creation? We have ecosystem building, which is, now I know it's a verb. I'm very excited to use it in that capacity going forward. And I think the piece that really secured the engine status for the industrial commons was workforce development. And the work that the industrial commons has done in Burke County is so impressive. And now we're taking that to our whole region of service, which is North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee, parts of South Carolina, and then parts of Virginia. And it's all the counties that really have a history and an heritage and an infrastructure in textiles.
Now, and you're new to North Carolina.
1 month.
So give us a sense of your, there, yeah, let's clap. Welcome. So give us a sense of your background and why. Why come here? What drew you to this opportunity?
Well, number one was Molly and Sarah. But to me, so my whole background has been in product creation. So I started out my first real job at Nike, where I helped start a whole new category of product. Got to move to Amsterdam with Nike and run the running business in Europe, which, I mean, that was a fun company to be in at that period of time. I worked at Solomon, so the footwear company, so skis, bindings, footwear, winter sports. And then I went to Smartwool in 2006. Actually was there for 17 years after the purchase by VF Corp. And so got to work across other brands like the North Face, Vans. So my whole focus has always been on how do I make great product that people love and that lasts. But I have been committed to sustainability from the day I read the book Cradle to Cradle, which, if any of you have read it, it came out in 2002 and has been really critical for me making decisions in my career. And I went to Smartwool because I'd worked in synthetic fibers all of my life in footwear and apparel, but I was really intrigued by natural fibers and natural performance fibers. So that took me down a whole road learning about regenerative farm practices, but what really got me here was we were getting rid of a lot of samples, fabric header cards, and cleaning out our office to move to Denver with VF. And we had 1,500 pounds of beautiful wool fabrics. And I'm like, we're not throwing this away. We're getting a storage unit. We're putting it in there till we have a plan. And I called Dan St. Louis at Manufacturing Solutions Center, who we had worked with for years and years. Smartwool manufactures approximately 13 million socks in Tennessee and North Carolina. So I had been coming here for quite a long time. But I called Dan and I said, hey, I'm really looking for somebody that can help me figure out how to make a circular fiber and yarn. And he's like, I want to connect you with Molly Hemstreet. And that was 4 years ago. And it has been almost a magical journey. It sounds crazy, but if you do any sort of R&D work, things don't work. And pretty much everybody told me, that's never going to work. You're going from long staple, it's going to be short staple, nobody can spin it, it's never going to be durable. I got a million reasons why it wouldn't work, but the beauty was nobody at senior leadership at VF was paying attention. So we went for it. And the other thing about innovation and R&D, I think there's this moment, like, I don't know if you guys are all kind of hands-on people, but sometimes you can do very simple proof of concept exercises. I mean, if it's a name you want to go with, you do a Google search. Well, I had been told my whole life that you can't recycle any textiles with elastane or lycra or stretchy stuff, basically. And so I was like, maybe I'll just try it myself. So I threw socks in my Cuisinart. It worked. I was like, no problem.
Socks and Cuisinart, y'all.
I mean, it works.
Minimal viable product, right?
Why? Let's give it a go. So that was the beginning of the project with material return, and it has become an incredible part of the Smart Wool product line. It's proving to be more durable. Yes, it took a lot of iterations, but it is one of the best examples of pure circularity that is now at scale, and that means jobs at spinners, that means jobs at grinders, that means jobs across the infrastructure, and that's what's so interesting about the problem we're facing right now with so many discarded textiles. We can turn that waste into wealth, and we're going to make it happen.
There you go. And we should note that the NSF engine grant that is funding the textile engine, as she said, there's 10 different grants across the country. This is the only rural location. And I want to come back to that. We're gonna get to your comments and questions in a few minutes. But before we do that, that's what I want to ask. So Molly, and I'll start with you. Like, based on your experience, you've been doing this now for quite some time, started with your own business, went to Industrial Commons, now we've got the textile engine. What's different about supporting innovation in this entrepreneurial ecosystem in a rural place? What's different about rural? What kind of lessons or challenges would you point to as some of the key takeaways about the unique characteristics of it being rural?
So to Ann's point, I think a lot of it is there's not necessarily that connectivity infrastructure that sometimes there's not even connectivity infrastructure with the broadband. We can start there. But there's often not those deep resources that are in other urban areas. And so you often just go for it. And you base it on relationships that you have that are, adjacent relationships. So I think the key to relationships, creativity, and just trying to start your own path, because there's often not the resources there that you need. So in philanthropy, in the larger world of philanthropy, of all the resources that go out, only 7% ever goes into rural communities. So they are just traditionally under-resourced. So I think there's this spark of creativity that often comes out, and trying things where maybe you would wait to be funded, you just kind of go for it. And then I do think the relationships are very genuine, and people really band together and they stick together, not to idealize it at all, but I think there is a sense of kind of having someone's back. And I'll say the other thing is, like, one thing we work culturally is just not to be bridge burners, because we always say that person is they're going to be coaching your little league team, and you're going to see them in the grocery store. So I think there's something about really looking for those people and not burning bridges and finding the win-wins for your allies. And that's really important, not just for everyone, but that's universal, but I think particularly in rural communities, that is something that we hold very sacred.
Yeah, that person-to-person relationship, and those relationships often go back as well, like they can even be generational. And what I also love about what's happening, what you all have built, is that it's built on the heritage of the place, right? To your point, You've got assets in terms of knowledge and just a history, and even people recognizing the area for the textiles and furniture that have come out of Western North Carolina. And Ann, let me turn to you because, you know, when you're dealing with someone like NSF, like the National Science Foundation, or even philanthropy, you often hear wanting to reach scale or, you know, get a big return on investment. So how do you think about that for this particular engine? Like, what does scale, quote unquote, look like with a rural network like that? And how do you think about that?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting with NSF. I feel like my background with VF has actually served me really well in kind of learning how to speak their language, how to navigate, because there is like the whole NSF engine approach, and then there's 10 engines, so it's just like VF and the multiple brands, and how do you adapt your strategic planning? How do you take all of their guidance for all of the things, partnership agreements, governance, but then adapt it in a way that makes sense for your region and for your business opportunities? I think, you know, after the election, we had a sit-down session in the morning, and we don't know what the next wave is going to bring. And so as we're thinking about how do we scale, we're really looking at the business opportunities within this. So we've identified 2 areas that we are really going to drive the work on. So the first one is on circular textiles, and the second one is on textile quality hemp. And there's very specific reasons for those 2 things. They're problems that haven't been solved yet. There's areas within them that need focused work on both R&D and commercialization, and in some case, investment. But if we can get them right and can get all those silos of great work that are happening to come together, we're in a unique, really, position to be able to do that. It will be a huge win for this region, and that's a big driver. And I think if you take it one step further, there's some pretty incredible work being done now on robotics in manufacturing, also another tech space. And that work has the ability to level set some of the cost concerns or the cost differences, a lot of things that were offshored a long time ago. So I think if we're thinking really big, we can not just do this at the material level, which is our primary focus right now, but we can help kind of pave the way for more manufacturing to come back. And if we can do that, the scale is significant.
Well, this has been quite an inspiring story and trajectory, and I want to give all of you a chance to ask some questions. What has this brought up for you as you've listened to Molly and Ann talk about a textile engine that's set to disrupt the whole industry, and one that is set in rural Western North Carolina? So I see a hand back there. And if you can just introduce yourself before you ask your question.
Hi, I'm Heather Joy Kinney. I'm president and CEO of Gateway Community Development Corporation in Henderson, North Carolina, Vance County. And my question isn't necessarily about textile, but so our town built its wealth in tobacco and textile eventually, but in the 30s and 40s, Henderson was bringing in millions of dollars, and downtown was a city center. But now we have that same problem of dilapidated 100-plus-year-old buildings and lack of investment. Bankers don't see the value in our town, so they don't want to lend to folks. So I'm very interested and what you all did and what kind of ideas you have for rural communities like mine. I'm an entrepreneur myself. I own properties downtown, and it's really hard to find resources to help build a business, especially those that will help other entrepreneurs. So what ideas or suggestions do you give to a tobacco town like mine, and what are the resources out there for us? Thank you.
Molly, do you want to get us started on your experience on that?
Sure. So thank you so much for that question. You know, I think that's the theme of this is like, you are that solution to get it going. And I feel about like so much of the engine started with this little company that I did start. You know, again, as an employee-owned company, my goal to there was not to stay, but to get as many people involved as possible. So what I think that allowed me to see was what were the assets. So what have you been able to spark that can start to Ann's point about this ripple effect? Where are the networks that you can start to build? And that was really what I think we started to see is how does a business become a network, become a movement that starts to become a magnet to draw things into it? Because when I started that little company, no one was thinking about sustainable textiles at that point. So how can your company start to be in dialogue to build networks and movements that you are probably, you know, might be that center of gravity right now? We have really been, and it was often not the people in our county and our town that invested in us in the beginning. It often takes people from the outside to recognize the brilliance that you have seated in your community, because it's often not your community that will see you. We have been very lucky to have the Appalachian Regional Commission that funds in Appalachia, and if there's other regional identities that can help you come in and create those blueprints, I would say that there are those allies there. And then I think, again, like NC Idea is a phenomenal example of a network that's trying to resource small businesses and small networks and help you find those resources. And I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards about some of the state projects that we've been able to do and to some of that resources we've been able to pull into our communities. But I think you probably are your answer.
Yeah. And I will say, visiting a lot of different towns across the country, it really does start with a spark of a small group of people that then does grow into, and Molly, you even just talked about it, it grows into some kind of civic collaboration. And these can be formal or informal groups, but it is just people coming together from that particular place who start to be entrepreneurial together. And I don't mean just in a business sense, but like in a civic sense as well, because it is hard to find that first investment or some of those investments. And so you sort of just have to have a group of people who are committed to working together to be able to find that investment. I think we have one here.
Yep, thank you. Hey, good morning. Thank you very much for this. My name is Ron Berry, part of Artificially Digital. And so it's actually good to be able to listen to you talk. I think Jeff is tired of me talking to him at the Manufacturing Innovation Center. But basically, we specialize in AI. And one of the big things I'm curious about is the best way to engage with you all as it concerns textile, because, of course, I also have a supply chain background. I see a number of opportunities here, especially when you think about things like the Berry Amendment, all these kind of things. Like I said, Jeff is tired of me talking about this. So I definitely love to figure out the best way to engage with you all. That's really my question.
Yeah, I think sorting the...
So I think just initially what comes to mind, one of the biggest challenges and bottlenecks with circularity is sorting. And so if you think about, you probably haven't thought about it much, but if you think about if it's what goes to Goodwill and can't go anywhere else and it ends up, they can't resell it, it ends up being trashed. That is not worth much when it's all mixed. But if you can separate into just cotton, just polyester, just nylon, just wool, all of a sudden that becomes a lot more money per pound. And there are some technologies right now that are being used. They have challenges, so there are still a lot of manual steps to it. That is the place where I think we can most directly use AI, is in the sorting process. So that's where very first thing that comes to mind. I'm sure there's going to be more, but that's where I would start.
You can find us afterwards.
Hi, guys. I'm Bridget Pfeiffer with Living Better Life in Edgecombe in Nash County. And I'm geeking out on all of this because I'm a straight up geek. But I loved what you guys were saying anyway, because we were actually putting together a collaboration for the NSF Convergence Accelerator in the area of agritech, robotics, and AI. And I would love to, because we're putting together an innovation hub around workforce development and all of those things that just poked out. But as far as pulling together those different pieces and different parts, building that ecosysteming, what are some of the steps that you would say to start pulling those pieces in, not on a competitive, but a collaborative space when so many are doing the same things?
Molly, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I think there's something about fundamentally understanding how important they are. So that's really, I think, the brilliance of the National Science Foundation grant is it's really that interconnection between the innovation, the commercialization, the workforce, and the network building. And if you do one of those by themselves, they will not be as strong as if you do them together. So I think first and foremost, it's like recognizing the power of you are so much bigger. The whole is so much bigger than the sum of the parts. And so to find people that really start with that understanding in mind, and then go find those people and those allies that want to work together for a region. They want to have a long-term vision. And that was really what we did when we built our original team. So we keep talking about the Manufacturing Solutions Center. There's no better people that can do testing and innovation. So we pulled them in. The fiber specialists as Gaston, the education and research specialists at NC State. So pull that network. The entrepreneurial, NC Idea is also on our core founding board. The research that you can get from someone like the Department of Commerce. So it's really finding those allies that are specialists, but understand the value of the integration as well. And I would say start small. I think often we build these networks and they start too big too quickly, and you can't build a cohesive group. So it's like really put some guardrails on the side and smart with a very small cohesive group that despite the funding, you're going to stay together. And I think that was one thing. And I will say the other group we've tried for a lot of these big grants and we failed. And we said each time we're going to get better at it and we're going to learn something from it. And part of the work is still going to go forward. And it was really that trying over and over again that helped us coalesce as a group. So when we finally did get to the place, it's like we trusted each other, we were strategic together, and we knew where each of us stood in terms of like kind of our core competency to bring to the coalition. And I think that's really important.
So I think that's a really important point, what you were saying about think about starting small, because you just used a word, trust, which I find is actually part of the magic of what really starts to build momentum in local communities. And it is building that trust. And that requires a lot of time and effort and together. And it usually starts small and then grows outward rather than just trying to get everybody to the table at once and trying to incubate something coming out. Well, we're coming to the end of our time. And so just to offer each of you the opportunity, what would be one final thing that you would just leave this audience with that we really haven't talked yet about that you think is important, if you have anything to offer? Molly, why don't we just start with you?
Just don't forget like the joy of the work. I mean, we had a really phenomenal group come. There's an ally, a region in Spain called Mondragon, which is kind of this pinnacle of employee ownership that a lot of people come to. And one of their allies came and one of our mentors came, and I was hoping he was going to give me the silver bullet of like, what should you do? And he's like, just have parties and find joy and remember why you like each other, because the road is long. This is a marathon. It is not a sprint. And we have to remember to find our joy in the work because it is hard. And so I would just encourage you to remember that, soften your edges when you can and keep going, but find joy in the purpose as you go along.
Thank you. Ann?
I would say there's so many things we can learn from what's been already done, whether it's taking the 100-year view of indigenous cultures on your strategy and how do you responsibly grow what you're working on. I think there's so many things you can learn from business models. So looking at what the Italians have done with consortia and how do you bring people together that are trying to achieve the same commercial goal, and the rising tide floats all boats. And I think for this group in particular, part of the work we're doing is going to be to encourage entrepreneurism. So we are starting out with some micro grants, partnering with NC State. At the beginning of the year, we're going to have small grants for textile innovation, and as we go into years 3 through 5 on funding, there's going to be a lot of money built in that we'll want to do matching things with. So stay connected with us is my ask.
Good person to know. So there you have it. Learn from the past and have joy in the work. And congratulations to both of you. And looking forward to hearing more about the disruption in the textile industry coming outside of Western North Carolina. Thanks very much.